The issue I'm having right now is that my needle is just staying at the cold and under the cold line. It does move a little bit, like when it gets really hot, it gets like almost to the bottom peg on the gauge, but that's not really giving me a very accurate representation of how hot the engine's getting. And in summertime, it's really important to make sure that your car is not overheating. So the first thing to do is kind of troubleshoot and make sure that your sender unit for your temperature gauge is working. On a 5-liter Explorer, the temperature sensor is right there. That's your, I guess, sending unit for your coolant temperature. So what you can do with that is you unplug it. Alright, so I got the connector off. You can see down there right there. There's 2 pins on this guy right here, but there's actually only 1 wire going to it. So you want to make sure you're using the side that has that wire in it. So for me, it's the far side, for at least my year. This is a 97 Explorer with a 5-liter engine. And I'm going to basically measure the resistance between, so that pin right there, and the ground. Alright, so the important numbers to remember are 18 ohms, fully hot. 45 ohms should be if it's about the middle of the temperature range, and 300 ohms cold. I just warmed it up, so I'm expecting maybe a little bit higher than 45 ohms. Now this is actually a new temperature sending unit, so it should be good. So when I measured the resistance between the ground and the lead on the sending unit, I got 242 ohms. This is a higher number than I was expecting, but at least it's lower than 300, which means it's right in the range that it should be. So if you got to this point and you actually found like a crazy number, when your engine was slightly warmed up, it wasn't within that range. If you can find a resistor, you can put it in between the ground and that wires temporarily, and then see if your gauge moves somewhere in the proper range. And that would tell you that everything is working except for your sending unit, and you just have to replace that. One thing I forgot to mention is the internet's really going to want to tell you to just take that connector and ground it right to the frame. And that doesn't always work to verify that your gauge is good. That does verify that your gauge is doing something. That doesn't mean that it's working properly. I also don't necessarily think it's good for your gauge because full hot's supposed to be 18 ohms, so there's always supposed to be a little bit of resistance, not just go straight to 0. You know, if you save old circuit boards, things like that, you should be able to find a resistor that's 100 ohms, and it should show up somewhere in your gauge to kind of give you a rough ballpark estimate. But the next thing you're going to want to do after you verified your sending unit's good is that you're going to want to remove your gauge cluster, which is kind of the pain. There's a couple different panels you have to remove on the bottom. You're going to need a 7 and 8 millimeter socket, and also a Phillips head screwdriver to get the clamshell that's around your steering column out. And then once you get to the back side here, there's 3 connectors, and there's also your shift indicator setup, which pops out back. There's a couple clips on the bottom, and this whole thing pops out. Oh, I forgot. There's also a screw holding this adjuster. If your gears don't match up with your indicator on your gauge cluster, this is a really good time to adjust that so that they do. I'll link a really helpful video in the description if you're curious about this job. I have the selector disconnected right now. The hardest thing to disconnect is actually the shift indicator. These are actually pretty easy. This is actually a good cluster that I pulled from the junkyard, but we'll get into that after I start diagnosing things. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is there's 3 connectors. There's a big white connector, a little white connector, and a black connector. And so the third connector over is a red and white striped wire, and that goes right to your sender that we were just looking at. And so you're going to measure the resistance between this and that other wire that goes to your sender. That's like one continuous wire that goes right here. And so you're going to want to make sure that that's very low. Under 5 ohms is right around where you want to be. And in my case, it was good. It was around, 3 or 4 ohms. The next thing you want to do is you want to make sure that it's not shorted anywhere. You really shouldn't be able to measure any resistance from the ground to that wire. These pins on your steering column worked well for me as grounds. The next test is you want to make sure that there's power coming to your cluster, and for that you want to go with the little white connector, and on one end there's a red with yellow striped wire, and that's the power coming to the cluster. So with your vehicle key turned to the on position and your battery connected, put your red lead here and your black lead on a ground location. Make sure you have over 10 volts going to your cluster. I did that, and that was good. The next step is you want to make sure that your cluster is getting a good ground. So you want to take your black connector, and the second from the end is a black wire with a white stripe, and you want to measure the resistance between this and your ground. Again, you want it to be less than 5 ohms, very low resistance, so that you know your cluster is getting power and ground. So now that we checked your cluster has power and ground, the sender wire doesn't have a short in it, it's getting good feedback from the sensor. The next step is to make sure your gauge itself is good on the back of your cluster. Alright, so I've got 2 clusters here. One's from the junkyard and one is from the Explorer that I'm working on right here. We have all these different gauges, right? So there's ways to test you know, if these gauges have had like some sort of mechanical failure in them or whatnot. And the way to do that is you go back, and they all have different test specs that you can measure. So you can see our coolant temperature sensors right there, and I'm gonna go right here. Okay, so hopefully you can faintly see on the board there's an S temp. It says S temp, B, and G. And so I'm gonna measure the resistance. I got my voltmeter here set to resistance in 200 between B and S. So I'm getting 53 ohms. I immediately know that that's bad because that's supposed to be 235 ohms plus or minus 21 ohms. So that's way off. And to be fair, the spec I'm comparing this to is for a 2000 Explorer. This is 97, and I did look at another 96 Explorer that had very similar numbers, so take that for what it's worth. But I have already tested the cluster that I'm going to use, and it works properly within the spec. So the other one you're going to test is between S and G. And there I have 37.7 ohms. Okay, so that's supposed to be 100 plus or minus 10 ohms. So both of those are way off. Now I'm going to grab the good cluster. To get a good cluster, I had to take apart the dashes on, let's see how many, 5 different Explorers. So I don't know if this is a common failure point, but I thought it was pretty interesting. And I think this is from a 2000 Mountaineer, not actually an Explorer, same partner. Anyway, so now let's again measure between S and G. This time we have 106, which is, you know, plus or minus 10 of 100. So that's good. Let's measure between S and B. Okay, it's not picking up anything, but remember that 235 is the range, so I should have to step up a bit. Okay, so what I'm getting right here is 250.
And the range I want to be in is
235 plus or minus 21. So that is good right there. I got this whole cluster at my local junkyard for $26, so not a bad deal at all. Now I've already plugged everything in just to verify that everything is good. And so now I'm going to go ahead and swap the
just the coolant temperature sensor portion of the gauge from the junkyard cluster to my old cluster.
So there's a bunch of T15 Torx bits all the way around. So I'm just going to go around, take these out. You want to have your hands clean because you're going to be inside here. Once you get inside the dash, you don't want to get anything dirty. Remove this guy. And I don't want to mess with these dials with my hands, so I'm just going to pop this whole assembly out. So screwdriver action. Okay. I'm just going to put the new guy right back in place.
So So at this point, I put all the connectors in the back of my gauge cluster, put the shift select indicator back in, and was convinced I had the problem solved. But unfortunately, when I turned the car back on, the gauge needle was in a different spot, but it was at the top of the range for some reason, so way out of spec still. And I wasn't sure what was going on. Since I knew the entire cluster assembly worked, at this point I was just doing process of elimination, so the next thing I tried was swapping the Slosh module, which is a little circuit board that puts a delay in the reaction of your gauges. It's called a Slosh module because when fuel is sloshed around in your tank, your gauge doesn't also move erratically as well. Unfortunately, this didn't work either, so there's only one option left.
Alright, so it turns out you can swap all of these sections.
So basically, I'm going to put all the good gauges into the white piece from the cluster that I got from the junkyard. This houses the main circuit board that connects all the individual gauges to the plugs on the back of the cluster.
Alright, so I didn't even put the gear selector in, but after I swapped the board, hopefully this works. Alright, that was it. It was a bad board. Huh. I bet that there was nothing wrong with those two gauges. I bet the issue was just in the board. That's freaking sweet, man.
After I drove the Explorer around for a bit, my check fuel cap light went off. I already replaced the cap 2 different times, and it still didn't go away. I kind of checked for any obvious evap leaks. So I'm really curious to see maybe if this improves my gas mileage because the car is seeing that I'm getting up to temperature. I'll post any updates in the comments. Before this, I was getting like 10, 11 miles to the gallon on highway, which is bad even for a 5-liter Explorer. So I hope this video showed you what you're looking for. Let me know if I missed anything. And thanks for watching.